Hey everybody, welcome to From the Hangar. Happy New Year! If you're tuning in, right after the New Year has gone, and we're kind of well into 2025, and so it's exciting. We are sitting here with the man and the legend, Gene Jordan, and welcome, Gene Jordan. Let me say hi.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good to be with you, Lem.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This is awesome. This is going to be a good conversation.
You're welcome.
It's going to
Should
be
be
great.
fun.
We generally with the MEF organization, we love to kind of like have a theme going through the year and stuff. And so I think a couple of years back we did serving together. And so this year, what we're going to do is imagine together and remember together, as we have marked 80 years with MEF. It was 80 years old this year. So that's big time.
It is. It's great.
So the first part of this year, we're doing a remember together kind of thing, inviting people all together to kind of just look back and see how God has really been good to this organization and the ministry that MAF has. And so what a better fitting way to do that than to have you on the podcast and kind of do that. Remember.
Are you saying I'm 80 years old?
No,
okay.
But close.
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
I kind of dug myself in the hole there, didn't I?
No hole.
Oh man. But anyway, let's kind of get into it. Why don't you just introduce yourself for those who don't know who you are and are watching or listening? That would be really great.
Okay. Well, you referenced a timeline there, and that's fine. My parents went to the country of Ecuador in 1951. I came along in 1952. So I have known about MAF as long as I can ever remember, because MAF's second pilot, Nate Saint, started flying in Ecuador in 1947-48. So I always knew about this guy that was down in the jungle flying a little yellow airplane around. But Lem, previous to that, the organization that my parents served with, HCJB World Radio, they went to Ecuador in 1930.
Ooh, okay.
And were well established by the mid-40s. And I actually have a letter of the HCJB World Radio lawyer that wrote the government of Ecuador, the Minister of Government, and said, you're going to get a request from this organization from the United States, from California, called Mission Aviation Fellowship, or known in Latin America as Alas de Socorro, Wings of Help. And so you should let them in the country. They're a good organization. They will help you. So it's interesting that the organization my parents served with for 38 years had a little piece in MAF coming into the country. And then I got to know MAF growing up.
That's incredible. So there's so many questions. Okay, first question. Did your parents ever talk to you about what life was like before MAF was there, and like did it affect their mission or their ministry out there?
Well, not really. See, both my parents were musicians, and they were serving with a large Christian shortwave broadcasting station in the capital city.
Oh, okay. Was it
Alas de Socorro, or MAF, was down on the edge of the jungle in Shell, Ecuador.
Ah, okay.
But my mom had been very, very close friends with Elizabeth Elliot at Wheaton College days.
No way.
And then she came to Ecuador. My parents were in Ecuador, and they continued that friendship. So, back in the mid-50s, anybody in Ecuador was kind of just of the missionary community. It didn't matter if you were HCJB or MAF or Gospel Missionary Union or the Alliance or the Brother. We were just all there working together. So
that's cool.
Was there an effect? Not directly like you talked about, but absolutely knowing what each of the missions was doing, how we complemented each other. Because the mission my folks work with established a hospital in Shell.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the patients that Nate and the others brought out over the
Yeah.
years would be cared for at the mission hospital run by HCJB World Radio.
So was your family based in Shell, or were you guys based in the capital as
No,
well?
we were based in the capital city. But during high school, I would take every opportunity I could to go down to Shell. And I would sweep the hangar floor. I would wash the airplanes. I'd load the airplanes. I'd fuel the airplanes. I'd tie people in, buckle them in the airplane, always hoping for a ride. And through my high school years, I got a lot of rides. And that's when I decided that this might be something that I would enjoy doing, maybe I could do, and God would have me do.
Oh, cool.
There was a gentleman from England, Major Ian Thomas, and he spoke at our high school. And I remember him challenging us. I probably was a junior in high school. What are you going to do with your life? God has given you life. And to me, that actually took on extra meaning because I'm an adopted kid. So my mom chose to give me life. She chose then to put me up for adoption. And God put me in a family that ended up in Ecuador. And so here I was.
Wow.
What am I going to do with my life? When you're 16, 17, 18 years old. And seeing MAF, seeing the impact that the airplanes made in the communities, immediate impact of an emergency flight, the long-term impact of caring for the people and building a church there, it's like, maybe I can do this.
Yeah.
So I applied to Moody Bible Institute's flight program, which used to be in Tennessee, is now in Spokane, Washington, and was accepted. And left Ecuador when I graduated from high school, went through Bible school in Chicago, and then down to flight school. And along the way, I met Lynn, and she wanted to be a missionary kid school teacher. And many, many places around MAF's world, where MAF is, there's an MK school there.
Okay,
so that was good.
I love it. Okay, so we're flying over many years, pun intended here.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little. I want to go back to your childhood because I do want to geek out a little bit, Gene. Okay, there is this legendary photo of you as a 3-year-old toddler standing next to Nate Saint in front of his yellow Piper airplane, and it's just one of those things where like, oh my goodness, you have a photo. It's just kind of, if people remember the episode where we interviewed Dave and Chrissy Rask, and Chrissy was talking about how you can look up in Betty Green's flight logbook during her time in Papua, and you can find Chrissy's name in her flight log and her passenger logbook. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. It's just like so great. Like, do you ever kind of look at that photo and think, man, that's what a great blessing to be, like, just have like this connection to Nate Saint in that way, even if you don't necessarily remember it.
Well, no, I don't remember it. That picture came from a slide that my parents had. And I remember them telling me that it was taken on a visit into Shandia, the place where Jim and Betty Elliott ministered for many years before Jim was killed. And interesting you should ask, because just recently, I mean, within the last 6 months or so, I found out from some letters that Elizabeth had written to her parents. She wrote one that said, Gene and Ruth Jordan are coming down to visit me, and they're going to bring some things you sent down. And then another letter said, we had a great visit with the Jordans. All your stuff got here type thing. So I've been able to bracket that picture. I don't know if it was the flight in or the flight out.
Okay.
But I've been able to bracket it to about 4 days in 1955 when my parents went to visit the Elliots, Betty being Mom's good friend. So that was kind of cool.
That's cool.
I know where it was, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I can say I'm probably the only MAFer alive that flew with Nate Saint.
Wow. That's really neat. And so, I mean, like, did you get to go interior when you were at TCK out in Shell, or so? I mean, why did you guys go to Shell? I guess just to visit. Like, you guys were all friends, and you just decided to go out there, or did they say never fly into the capital with his airplane? Like, what?
Well, he did fly into the capital, but generally transferring a patient up there. He actually had an accident leaving the capital city of Quito due to what we know today as density altitude, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, I would say, Lem, it's because of relationship and friendships. This trip to Shandia, Mom and Betty were good friends. Let's go visit them.
Okay.
And so other people in Shell and even out interior that would be up in Quito, my parents would host them, or they'd go visit them down in Shell or where they were. I know that there were several times that my dad went out into the jungle and took his violin along and, played violin music for them out there.
That's so great.
So it was basically relationships and friendships and companionship. But that kind of was a start of exposing me to MAF, even as a kid.
Yeah. And then even going interior and seeing what life was like out there for people and how the airplane connects them to the rest of the world and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Man, that is so cool. That's great. Okay. So then, like you said, you became a grown-up and you decided you wanted to become a missionary pilot, Moody, and you met Lynn.
Right.
And so did you guys meet in college, and like how did that relationship become a thing?
We did meet in college, and I noticed her. She was cute as a bug, and we started talking, and I found out that she came from a church in Miami. She grew up in Miami, Florida. Her church was a very mission-minded church. The headquarters of the mission my parents worked with was in the Miami area. And so we knew a lot of the same people from that church. And just talking and finding out that, I told her I was looking at missionary aviation and MAF. She said she wanted to teach overseas at a missionary kids school. So there was a lot of mutual goals out there. And then God brought us together. And it didn't hurt at all that she was cute as a bug.
I kind of wish that I should have invited your wife to come on too. I maybe you can speak for her, but I was going to ask, like, we know what kind of motivated you to go into mission work as a pilot. What was it about teaching overseas? Like, what was it about that really motivated her to pursue something like that?
Lynn's mom has been involved in Child Evangelism Fellowship, CEF, for as long as Lynn can remember. So she grew up attending good news clubs, hearing missionary stories, very missions-minded church, as I said. So I think a lot of that shaped her into, I'd like to teach, just like I wanted to fly an airplane, but I want to have some purpose behind my teaching. So if I can teach missionary kids, it allows their parents to work overseas, then that's something I'd like to do. And that got focused down then into us together in MAF. But she taught all our years overseas in the little Nate Saint School in Shell, Ecuador. It was named after Nate. And then there was 25 kids in that little school. And then when we moved up to the capital city of Quito, there was a 600 student body missionary kids school run by the Alliance. And she taught 4th and 5th grade there. Cool. So she was able to use her teaching the whole time we were overseas.
That's awesome. That's great. And MAF was always on your radar to be the organization you joined as a pilot? Or?
MAF was, growing up in Ecuador, Wycliffe Bible Translators had a big base in the northern jungles. MAF was more down in the south. And when I was a senior in high school, the captain of Wycliffe's DC-3 taught our boys, young men's Sunday school class. And we could earn rides on his DC-3 by memorizing scripture.
Oh, that's cool.
So there are a lot of verses I learned to get a ride on the DC-3.
That's awesome.
I was aware of JARS, Wycliffe's arm, aviation arm, and I saw what they did, and I saw what MAF did, and they're both great organizations. So both of them had a little bit of a influence in my life,
Yeah,
but ultimately
cool.
I chose MAF.
MAF, yeah. I apologize to those who are listening or watching if I'm repeating myself, but I grew up as a TCK with Wycliffe, and so JARS is kind of like that's like where my heart is kind of thing. And so
but we can still be friends.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like betraying JARS by joining MAF all these years ago.
No.
But there has been a time where like this is kind of a weird tangent, but like on emails, you can like put your little profile picture or something. And so when you send an email out, like it shows who's sending the email, like your name and your photo, right? Well, there was a time where I grabbed a photo of myself when I was in the Philippines as a TCK, and I had like this old 90s style JARS logo on the shirt. And that was like MAF email, but then like people internally would see me with a picture of me as a kid with a JARS shirt. And that was like my little like jab towards everyone here.
That's good.
Oh man, I just love to instigate a little bit of like conflict. But no, I actually, it's kind of fun because like even in Papua, like there's JARS there and there's MAF there, and they kind of they have hangars like next door to each other, and they're all like really great friends. And I think it's just really fun to see the missionary community kind of come together, and there's not this competition or kind of like there's not this competition that's happening. They're all together working for the same
slightly
God.
Different angle of using our airplanes, but all ultimately to build the church.
Right.
And in Wycliffe's case, to allow people to read God's word in their language. And that I've seen people when they get the Bible for the first time and they can start to read. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. What was it like when you and Lynn joined MAF and they assigned you to Shell Ecuador? What was that like for you guys, especially you growing up in Ecuador and now coming back as a pilot and kind of connecting your childhood with like your profession, essentially?
Yeah, a good question, because in the process of candidating with MAF, of course, we let them know, and I had let them know where I grew up and knowing Spanish and all this blah, blah of MAF. But when they assigned us to Ecuador, it was like, wow, really? This is really cool. Now, I had kind of thought probably anywhere in Latin America because of Spanish. Mm-hmm. But when we were assigned to Ecuador, it's like, wow. But you know what, Lem? I remember calling my mom, and in those days, it was like $8 a minute to call Ecuador or something crazy.
My.
So, Mom, guess what? I got good news. What? You're going to have a baby? No, better. We've been assigned to Ecuador. So, we let my parents know, and we got a call from the Latin America regional director saying, Gene, we have a pilot in Venezuela that did not pass a flight physical. And so I want you to go to Venezuela.
Okay.
And I didn't want to go to Venezuela. And it's like, no. Hey, hang on. You told me Ecuador, and now you're saying Venezuela? No. Doesn't work that way. But through, probably 4 or 5 days of wrestling with that, I don't want to go to Venezuela. Lynn and I remembered that we told God, no, we'd go wherever you want us to go. And so I called the regional director back and said, yeah, we'll go to Venezuela. And I sent my logbook off to the Venezuelan consulate to get certified. And we were only a couple weeks from leaving the U.S. for language school. And, it was tough calling Mom and saying, hey, we're not coming to Ecuador. And just like a day or two before we left for language school in Costa Rica, this gentleman called and said, you know what? It was a lab mistake in Venezuela. The guy got all his license. He got his medical back. He's back to flying. I don't know where I'm going to send you. So we went to language school to brush up on Spanish, not knowing where we were going. People would say, oh, we're going to Paraguay. We're going here, whatever. Where are you guys going? We don't know. And you're here? Yeah. Well, what mission are you with? MAF. Oh, So,
Oh, that makes sense.
we were supposed to be in language school for 4 months. We had been there 2.5 months. The same manager called and he said, you know what? I need you to go to Ecuador now. Don't even finish your trimester. You know Spanish. Pack up and go. So we got a call on a Tuesday, and the next, not 2 days later, Thursday, but the next Thursday, like 10 days later, we were in Ecuador.
Wow.
And I think, Lem, as I look back at it, I think God gave me Ecuador, and then he took it away to check my heart.
Yeah.
And when my heart was right, then he gave it back. And we spent 22 years there. We raised our girls there. And, you know, we have dear friends there. We're still interested in the program. We were in Ecuador about 4 months ago, 6 months ago now, something like that. But I can look back now and see many, many ways that God worked from those early days.
Yeah. And that's just, I love stories like that because it just shows a good father who has your best interest in his mind, right? He wants to send you to where your heart is, but he also wants to make sure that he is first and foremost in your heart more than even the places you want to go or the things you want. And so, and it's like, all right, you're ready. Like, I just need you to get to a place where you remember that you will go wherever I send you. Yeah. But I'm going to send you to Ecuador. Yeah. But if I tell you that now, then you know, right? You're going to approach this completely differently.
Exactly.
And your heart won't be in the right place. So that's really neat. I love that. Well, give me some stories of what it was like to fly and be a pilot and raise a family and be a husband and out in Shell, Ecuador.
Well, the Ecuador program in the late 70s and through the 80s was a very traditional MAF program. Missionary supply line. We served quite a few different missions in 4 different language groups.
Wow. And
whether it was a weekly grocery run or moving translator helpers in or the missionaries from one place to another, very, very traditional of serving missionaries from the U.S., from Canada, from Europe. And as the 80s came in, then we saw little by little a transition to where we did more and more with the national church. Because the missionaries that had been in Ecuador from the late 40s and 50s and 60s had built up a church to where local believers had learned to read. They had the Bible in their language, or most of the Bible, or different portions. And they were now being active in getting out to other communities in other areas. So basically, when I look back and remember, I had the pleasure and privilege of going from a very traditional, what MAF is known for many, many years, to what we are today of working much, much closer with the national church. And their language is perfect. And they don't have to go to language school. And they know all the, you know. Yeah. So it was really, really good to participate in that and watch the church be built.
Yeah. And that's so cool. I think that's and we've seen and heard from other pilots throughout this podcast that once the national church becomes a mature church, and it's just the natural desire to take the gospel and further out and further in for the sake of their own people, right? And then missionary pilots are flying from one village to take that people from that village into a different village, and they're missionaries. They're basically just missionaries, but they're doing it internal, like in their own country. And it's just like, like you said, I think that's one of the cool things to hear you say and other pilots say, is that it's a huge privilege to be a part of seeing the church expand into places just because of a desire and a heart that God has put in these people for their own people.
You know, I remember one time when somebody talking to me, and I was telling them what we did with MAF, they said, well, you're not a real missionary. And it's like, well, you know, I'm not planting churches, but I serve those who do.
Yeah.
I'm not translating the Bible, but I serve those who do. I mean, anything that was done in mission work in Ecuador, MAF had their finger in. And one thing that I really appreciated, and pun intended, we had a bird's eye view of everything that was happening in the jungle, because in the morning I might be up in the north jungle among the Quechua people, and in the afternoon down in the south among the Achuar people. And moving missionaries around and nationals around, you had an idea of what God was doing in the different sections of the jungle. And that was pretty cool. And I think a lot of times, because we were involved in it every single day, we didn't see it. But when we step away and look at it, then we saw what God was doing. And I firmly, firmly believe that in 1930s, some Alliance missionaries wanted to come to Ecuador, and the government of the Republic of Ecuador said, our Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, so we need to let them in. And missionaries came in and started working in the coastal areas, and then up to the mountains, and then down into the jungle. And since, Nate opened things up in the late 40s, there were already missionaries there working. Yeah. But with the arrival of the airplane, of Nate and his little yellow airplane, and the radios and communications, I really believe that the Ecuador government's decision to allow missionaries in protected that part of Ecuador. Today, there are problems, but not the problems that other countries have had of illicit drugs. I mean, nothing happened in the jungle that they didn't know about it, because of the little communities that had radios, had communication. And I just think, it's not scientific, but I think God protected the country because of their attitude toward opening themselves up to the gospel message. And then, I could take you to villages in the jungle, and we could visit 10 villages. And if you could keep them straight in your mind, that Copatasa was the one with the dirt airstrip, and Bufeo was the one with the volleyball court across the airstrip. And, when we got back, and if we just spent 10 or 15 minutes at each airstrip and then say, which of these communities have accepted, at least in part, the gospel? You'd get a good score on that test. Copatasa has. Bufeo has. Maybe Yanchamacocha hasn't. You can just sense it and feel it in the people when they know that there's a God that created them, that loves them, that cares for them, and these funny-looking people in airplanes that also care for them. And it just changes their community. And as they understand who Jesus is and what he did, and they're changed spiritually inside, it affects their community. And you can just see it and feel it. So I had the privilege of flying in some of the latter years from the early guys that were in Ecuador, missionaries flying. Dave Olson, Dave Osterhoes, Hobie. But we saw this transition from foreign missionaries to the national church, and it's pretty cool. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
I love that. That's a highlight. That's the thing you go to when you think back about those times when you're flying.
I remember there's a guy, Lloyd Rogers, that worked in Ecuador for years. He's still down there. He's been working there for 60 years now.
That's incredible.
And we were flying back after conducting a pastors' conference for a week, where we would fly pastors from little villages into a slightly bigger one. They'd be together and be taught and sing and other. Anyways, we'd taken everybody home, and I was flying Lloyd back. It was a gorgeous day, good weather. The airplane was trimmed out, just had to go home, and I was kind of a little bit sleepy. And Lloyd says, the church in Conambo is standing on its own 2 feet. And it's like, well, tell me about that, Lloyd. He said, well, we had a great time with these pastors. They're applying the word as they read it and they understand it to their people and their culture. They're starting to develop songs that come out of Scripture in their way of singing. They're doing church discipline in their way, but basing it on biblical things. They're starting to stand on their own. And I think of my girls. As they grew up, they stand and they fall a lot. And then they start walking and they still fall a lot. And then they get their feet under them, and pretty soon they're running around. You can't contain them. Well, we saw this part where the church was getting on its own feet and running, not without mistakes, not without falling down, but to be a part of that, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Man. And you in your own life, you can see that development, kind of like the maturity of the church.
You're back to that old stuff again.
Yeah.
You're good.
I can't help it.
No problem.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, again, like, man, I can't get over the fact that like you've been with MAF. I mean, you essentially have been a part of the MAF story in one form or fashion for more than half its existence, Would you agree with that? Or is that okay.
That's correct.
I'm like, oh man. And I'm not trying to call you old just for the sake of being old, but like this is, like MAF is old. MAF it's a lifetime old, and you have been a part of it, and it's just so cool to have you on here. So I kind of wanted to ask you, what are some like maybe some truths about God that like kind of just held you firm, had you stand firm throughout all these years as being part of MAF?
Okay, and I'll start by going back to that lesson we learned when MAF said you can go to Ecuador, no one wants to go to Venezuela.
Yes. In
late 1999, going into early 2000, MAF asked if we would leave Ecuador and come back to the headquarters, which at the time was in Redlands, California. And I didn't want to do that either. I mean, I was in Ecuador. It was in my country.
I mean, it's your home,
but,
essentially, right?
We needed to respect the authority that MAF had over us. And so we did come back. And I ended up doing 17 or 18 years as MAF's VP of Personnel. And that was a good experience, too, of being involved with the people in MAF. We've got wonderful staff, for the most part. And I think the lesson is that, as I saw when we were assigned to Ecuador, I could lean on as we moved back to the U.S. that God knows what he's doing. And I was able to get around to most of MAF's programs around the world. And, what we do in Congo, Africa is so different in many ways than what I did in Ecuador. Congo is very different from Lesotho, South Africa. And each program has its own little mini personality. We have the same flight standards. We have the same maintenance standards. We do things well in aviation. But the feel of the program around the world is very, very different. So knowing that what God has for us is good. May not feel that way at first, but is good. It is something that I learned. Another thing, Lem, and a lot of times what we learn, the learning comes through deep pain. And several times I walked staff through a fatal accident, telling a young MAF wife that she's a widow because her husband was killed in an accident. And now looking back and seeing what God has done in that young woman's life and in their kid's life, it's like, God, I don't understand why this happened. But I do understand that you are good and that you know what is happening. And that you, even through deep pain and tears, you are God. And I can't say it's okay, but I can say it's okay because you have ordained it in ways we don't understand. So the knowledge that God knows what he's doing far beyond us. One of the pilots, Danny, that was killed in Ecuador, he had a daughter, Phoebe. Phoebe was 6 months old.
Oh, wow.
Phoebe is now a missionary in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, she looks just like her dad. And when I see her reporting or read, I am just so proud of Phoebe and what she's become. She never knew her dad, but the strength of her mom and the deep through 1,000 tears.
Yeah.
Knowledge that God is still in control. Phoebe's out in Cambodia, not using an airplane, but doing the same thing her mom and dad did. And to have that perspective over the years that God is good even through the pain.
That's powerful, Gene.
It's cool to learn.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I think, there's that temptation, right, to, through something very, very difficult and very, very hard to almost kind of brush over the pain, because by saying like, oh, God's in control or God's good or something, but to acknowledge that the pain is real, and we can go through that pain, and we can live in that pain, but still and still acknowledge the truth that God is good.
And Lem, I've seen people not only in MAF, but when something very difficult comes along, they can run the other direction.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel they don't learn, even through the pain and the hardness, the lesson that God is saying, this is what I need you to learn. I told you earlier that Elizabeth Elliot was a good friend of my mom's, and she did a lot of writing, and she wrote at one time, and she had a very hard life herself. I mean, her husband was killed by the Indians he wanted to minister to, and a lot of stuff in her life. God tested her, but she came through all that just never doubting of who he was. She wrote, God will not let you go through anything that isn't designed to shape you to come to understand who he is better. And we are very different. And so how God works in your life is going to be different from how he works in my life, because he created us. He knows us. Yeah. He knows who we are. And so I think of some of those hard times and think of, we can go through them and lean on God as hard as we want, or we can turn and run from them. And what are we losing? Can't answer it in this life.
Yeah. I am, and we could totally not have this in the episode too, but I am compelled to ask, was there something in you and your family's life that was really hard, that God really shaped you and shaped your understanding of him in a deeper way?
There is and was. And what I've referred to about our different assignments and placings, at the time it was difficult. But in MAF, I have been in situations where I have been lied about, I've been lied to, and I wonder why. What in the world is going on here? But, and it takes time, but I've come to find out maybe we were able to resolve a situation or not. But what I needed to learn was pushing me to be more forgiving, more open, more acceptance, more whatever. It might not have seemed like it at the time, but, why would this person do this to me? Yeah. Or my family, or to MAF, And so there have been times, it probably wouldn't be right to go into the details of those.
Oh, yeah.
But I can say I look back and see that God has been very, very, very faithful. One thing, Lynn, that I've struggled with is there are MAF kids, like we have two girls, like my girls, that grew up in Shell and made some not great choices in life, and their lives have not been that great. And it's like, God, why? Why, when we all grew up in the same MAF community, in the same hangar, doing, same thing. And I think of the missionaries whose moms and dads worked at the hospital or in the Bible Institute. We are all one community, yet there's some kids that are far, far from you and not following you, don't seek after you. Why in the world is that? And I don't have all the answers, but to bring it back to your question to me, one thing I'm extremely grateful for is that our girls love God, follow him with their lives, and are bringing their kids up to love him as well. No different than a church established at a remote community where you introduce them to God, you teach, and they learn, and they read, and they come to understand this isn't what Lloyd told me. It's what God's telling me and what's good for me and how he loves me. So, yeah, we're stubborn people.
Yeah.
And I think
Amen
that
to
God
that.
uses many different ways to break through that little by little so we can just get a slight taste of who he is and how much he loves us.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I know
You're welcome.
that was, kind of a hard hitting question there. And
It's okay.
I appreciate you being candid there. Well, we're coming up a little bit on time, but I wanted you to, I kind of want one more like story from you.
Yeah.
Like, can you give me give me a fun story, an impactful story, or both, or however you want to take it? But yeah.
Well, I think what I'll do, I mean, Lem, I have a lot of stories. And I think the best thing maybe to illustrate who and what MAF is and why we do what we do. About 70 miles east, a little bit southeast of Shell, is a community called Moretecocha. And this gentleman I've referred to, Lloyd worked in that community. And that community was run by a man who was sold out to the devil. He worshiped the evil spirits. He obeyed the evil spirits.
Oh, man.
And as Lloyd came into his community and started talking about a man named Jesus, this witch doctor hated Lloyd, threatened to kill him, hated him. He came to hate him even more when his son, the witch doctor's son, a young man named Ensequa, when Ensequa accepted what Lloyd was teaching from the Bible as truth and decided to follow Jesus. The father was furious, and he threatened to kill Lloyd. He pulled a gun on Lloyd, pulled the trigger. The gun did not fire.
Oh, wow.
And as I understand it, several weeks later, this man was cleaning the gun. It went off, and he killed himself.
Oh.
His son became the de facto leader of the community, and he led them into trying to understand that the evil spirits hate us and that God loves us. In fact, when this witch doctor was going to kill Lloyd, he pointed a gun at Lloyd and said, "I'm going to kill you." And Lloyd said, "Okay, but the spirits that hate you, my God that loves me, is bigger than they are. Do what you want to do." And that's when the gun did not fire. And Ensequa was taller than the average man in that community. Very handsome guy, long, straight, dark hair. And it was a joy to land in Moretecocha and see him. And they, "How you doing? What's going on?" Just big smile. Just his life had been changed. I was on emergency standby duty on Sunday, and I got a call from Moretecocha that they need to get a patient to the jungle. So I threw some stuff in the airplane and blasted off. Moretecocha is a fairly decent strip. It was a little bit narrow. It had a bend in it, so you had to make sure you either turn left or right, depending which direction you were landing or taking off. And it didn't shed water well. It was always kind of soggy, but a decent airstrip. And I landed and pulled up, got out of the airplane, pulled a door off to put a patient in, thinking it'd be an adult. And a lot of people around. And Ensequa walked out of the jungle, and in his arms, he was carrying his daughter, about 10, 11, 12 years old. "Ensequa, what's up?" "My daughter, she's sick." "Ensequa, let's get to the hospital." So I put him behind me in the airplane, and he was cradling his daughter, got her belted in, put the door back on, did some pre-flight checks, and blasted off for Shell. got up, headed home, called into the hangar and said, hey, I'll be there at, whatever my estimate of time was. Called the hospital, get the ambulance out. And I turned around to check to see how Insequa was doing. Everything was okay. Flew about 10 more minutes, turned around to check him, and tears were streaming out of his eyes. I said, Insequa, what's the matter? He said, Capitan, my daughter has died. What? Insequa, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. She has died. It's like, man, what's going on here? Insequa, do you want to go to the hospital or do you want to turn around and go home? He said, Capitan, I'd like to go home. So I banked the airplane around, and, the Indian communities, they're sharp. When an airplane comes back that soon, they know something's wrong. I landed and rolled to a stop, popped the door open. People came up to the airplane, looked in, reached in, realized what's happening. They started wailing and carrying on. And they took the young girl and got Insequa out of the airplane. He disappeared. And I remember standing there at the airplane saying, man, everything happened so fast. And so I did a pre-flight walk around the airplane very carefully, very slowly, making sure everything was okay. Because I really wasn't thinking about the airplane.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Insequa and his daughter. And so I climbed in, went through my pre-start check, everything twice slowly, make sure I didn't miss anything. I was just about ready to slam the door and leave. And I felt somebody tap my side, and I looked down, and it was Insequa. And he looked up, and he said, Capitan, I am sad, but I am not without hope. Lloyd brought us God's message. My daughter believed in Jesus, and I am sad, and I will cry, but one day I will see my daughter again. Thank you for bringing Lloyd and Jesus into our community in your airplane. And he disappeared back in the jungle. And I took off and headed home, and I just remember weeping the whole way home. I got home, put the airplane away, went across over to our house, hugged my girls, and they, Dad, you squeezed me too tight. And I was just thinking, my girls were the age of Insequa's daughter. And, why? God, why did you take Insequa's daughter? Other than Insequa was a pillar of belief in God through this to that whole community. And, I mean, that's what I said earlier. God tests us to see who we are. But he's faithful to be there. And so Moritecocha is one of numerous communities. At one point, we were flying into 242 different airstrips. And it's not, we go back to the original Nate Saint story. Not all the Waodani have decided to become Christians.
Yeah.
They have the Bible in their language, and some have decided, as we need to follow Jesus. And so communities in the Shuar communities, the Achuar communities, the Quichua communities, the Kofan communities, the Colonos, they all have a chance because of an airplane to hear about a God that created them, loves them, and gave his son for them.
Yeah.
That's the cool part of MAF. Yeah. The airplanes are cool. But they're only tools to do what we did. And it was my privilege to see it happen mainly in Ecuador and then in other parts around MAF's world from our time at headquarters. I just think Revelation 7, verses 9 and continuing, that John says, as far as I could see. Yeah. And I'm thinking, flying over the jungle, you look as far as you can see, it looks like a giant broccoli field. But as far as I could see people dressed in white, palm branches in their hands, and they're all crying out and singing that salvation comes from God and the Lamb, people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. That is going to be the coolest reunion ever.
Absolutely.
And there will be Shuar and Achuar and Wow and Kofan and Waodani and, every tribe that MAF works on, some that I can't even pronounce. They'll be there and we'll all be worshiping together. That'll be cool.
Man. Are you, I'm like holding back tears. Like, are you this poetic and this dramatic on your tours when you get tours? Like, well, are people near tears when you tell stories too?
Lem, it's simply a life we lived through MAF and then helping others that were doing a lot of the work out there, and it's been a privilege. And it's just fun to tell.
Yeah,
this is what God is doing. I could tell you a lot more stories, but it's fun to reflect on who God is, how He operates, even though we don't totally understand it. Knowing that one day there'll be people from every tongue, tribe, and nation, all praising God, and MAF will have been a very peculiar part of that around the world.
That's awesome. Gene, thanks so much for coming on and sharing and reflecting. And it's been a huge pleasure. And it's been fun to kind of just dig into that mind of all those memories you have and just get a small fraction of stories from you and insight. So yeah, it's been great. Okay. It's been awesome seeing you around the office too. So well, everyone, hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope you guys have had a wonderful New Year and a good holiday season. And as we go into 2025, I hope you guys are looking forward to the year as much as we are, especially here at MAF. We got a lot coming up. And so, with that, if you have any comments or thoughts to share, definitely leave that in the comment section below, or you can email us at podcast@maf.org. And then you can always watch more episodes too if you go to maf.org/podcast. So until next time, Gene, take care and thanks again.
Welcome.
All right. Take care, guys.